Today we're going to be talking about art rock, also called progressive rock. This was an important and influential movement of rock music, which arose in the very late 1960s and 1970s. Although because it was so influential, there have been examples of art rock throughout the last few decades, even to this day. The basic idea of art rock is that it's a crossover with art music. That is what a lot of people call, incorrectly, classical music. It's borrowing classical music ideas, such as forms, instruments, ideals, and even musical quotations. This sort of crossover and blending of the two styles can occur in two different ways. It can occur consciously, where a rock musician is saying, "Hey, look at my music, it's so much more intellectual than yours." Or it can occur naturally, as a rock musician might try experimenting with different sounds, different forms, different instruments, and find themselves suddenly in the realm of the same forms and sounds and timbres of classical music. This style also represents a more intellectual approach to rock music, rather than a focus on pure emotion and pure expression. In progressive rock, there's a lot more to listen to. The rhythms are more complex. The forms are large, expansive, and complex. You could spend time mapping out progressive rock pieces of music, just like you would a major classical symphony. So what are some of the specific features of art rock or progressive rock? First, there's a very prominent use of synthesizers, that is, electronic keyboard instruments, that don't sound like a real acoustic instrument, although many of them try to. Especially with musicians of the British invasion, we saw the rise of the lead guitar player as the front man of the rock group. In progressive rock, the real hero often was the keyboard player, the person playing the synthesizers. Guitar playing didn't disappear, but it certainly wasn't quite as important. And often many of the long solos and the important melodies were played on synthesizer. Art rock pieces are very long often. Instead of a 5-minute song, we might be talking about a 25-minute, half of a front side of an album as one song, often featuring long instrumental journeys where no lyrics occur. The lead singer is silent, and instead, the guitar or synthesizer goes on a long journey, exploring different melodies and different areas. A lot of rock music is very predictable in its form. A typical song might take the form of verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. You can find hundreds and hundreds of songs that fit that mold. Art rock has very unusual forms, a form which unfolds over perhaps 20 minutes. It would be difficult to map a lot of these long forms. You're really encouraged with progressive rock to put on the headphones and listen to a single song and concentrate on it as if you're traveling through some sort of musical landscape. An important idea associated with art rock is the idea of the concept album. A concept album means a single album which is about something. It's a record or an album which is unified by an idea or a storyline. This story can be very obvious and clear, or it can be rather vague and hinted at. A good example of this is the album Duke by Genesis, one of my personal favorites. We don't really know exactly who Duke is, but almost all the songs seem to relate to a story about a person. This is different from previous rock albums, where the album was just a collection of songs that the band decided they wanted to write. Art rock also features unusual harmonies and rhythms and topics. Without getting too technical, you can describe a lot of rock music with a very small harmonic vocabulary. That doesn't mean it's bad or uninteresting. It just means that the number of building blocks used in 90% of rock music is pretty much 5 different little items. This is different from classical music, where classical composers employed dozens and dozens and dozens of different harmonies, and professional musicians spend their learning career learning these different harmonies. Progressive rock borrowed from this large library of harmonies and rhythms, and did things that just were not typically done in mainstream or blues-based guitar rock. Who were some of these progressive rock musicians? Some of the most important are Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the band Yes, and its keyboardist Rick Wakeman. Rick Wakeman is one of the most influential figures in progressive rock. He was the keyboardist for the band Yes, but also had a large solo career. If you've ever seen the stereotype of the musician playing a wall of synthesizers and keyboards, you're pretty much thinking of Rick Wakeman. And in my opinion, most importantly, Genesis. This is my jam. I grew up listening to pretty much nothing but Genesis. Later progressive rock musicians would include Pink Floyd and the solo artist Frank Zappa, even though he doesn't often get labeled as a progressive rock musician. But he was indeed very experimental. Looking a little more specifically at some of these artists, let's talk about the band Yes. Their 1973 album, Close to the Edge, had on the first side only 3 songs. Again, a lot of art rock. The songs are very, very long. These long journeys, these musical landscapes. And again, the keyboardist, Rick Wakeman, had an important solo career. I've included 2 examples in I Learn. One from Six Wives of Henry VIII, and also from the 1974 album Journey to the Center of the Earth, which he recorded with the London Symphony Orchestra. This, I hope you're aware, is based on a Jules Verne novel of the same title. So this is an example of a concept album. It's basically a musical retelling of the Jules Verne novel. I hope you'll have the patience to actually listen to the whole example from Journey to the Center of the Earth, even though it's lengthy. In it, you will hear your typical rock instruments of drum set, guitar, bass, prominent use of synthesizers, and also orchestral instruments. There's also a narrator, including bits of text from the Jules Verne novel. Take note of how hard it is to keep a steady beat through lots of it. Instead, you're taking on this journey. It's not simply 4 beats to a bar with a heavy accent on 2 and 4. This is different from rock music that came before. The next example is Genesis. Again, my favorite band. There have been a number of musicians associated with Genesis, which was founded first in 1967 and was active until just recently. But some of the most important people are Peter Gabriel, who went on to have his own successful career as a singer, Phil Collins, who originally was the band's drummer and then moved up to be the lead vocalist. He also had a successful solo career. Very importantly, but a lot of people haven't heard of him, is Tony Banks. He was the keyboard player. And Mike Rutherford, the guitarist, who went on to be the frontman for Mike and the Mechanics. Genesis, in their early days, became well known for having elaborate, bizarre, psychedelic stage shows, where Peter Gabriel would often come out in strange costumes, dressed up, in alternate personalities, or as a giant flower, for instance. One of their most important works is the album The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. This was a concept album. It was all about a guy named Rael traveling through a bizarre, psychedelic New York City landscape. In other words, all the songs kind of tell part of the story, even if the storyline is vague and unclear. I've included on I Learn a couple important examples of Genesis, and a couple of my own favorites. I've also included a few examples by later artists who aren't necessarily pigeonholed as being progressive rock, but they're experimental and they use concept albums, so it's fair to apply that rating. This would include Frank Zappa and also The Who, which we already discussed a little bit with the British Invasion. Their concept album, Tommy, this rock opera, is an example of progressive rock. I've also included an example by a modern-day band, Coheed and Cambria. They are experimental, they use different meters than most rock music, so it's fair to call them progressive rock musicians. I'd like nothing better than for you to listen to all the examples in this module. This is the kind of stuff that I like best of all. This concludes today's lecture.